Hey, welcome back, biology students. I'm Mr. Silverstein. Today, we're going to get into the second stage of photosynthesis. So get out your unit packs or your spiral notebook. I'm going to share my screen and let's get started. And so this is part of our energy flow unit concept 4 on photosynthesis. We had already worked with looking at the overview of photosynthesis and the light-dependent reaction. Today we're going to move into part 3, which is dealing with the light-independent reaction. So let's go back to our big idea and recognize that radiant energy from the sun is transformed into chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis. And our objective in this lesson is for you to be able to describe the significant events of the light-independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle, and highlight what gets released as a product. So you can pick this up on page 25 in your notes pack, graphic organizer, or if you're not using that, add this into a new page in your spiral notebook. So let's first go back and review the first parts of photosynthesis, the light-dependent reaction. And so there are 2 stages in photosynthesis, as you recall. You've got the light-dependent reaction, where light is needed, and then the light-independent reaction, where light is not being used. And the light-dependent, or the photo portion of photosynthesis reaction, requires solar energy or an artificial light source that can put out the light waves that are similar to that of the sunlight. And the purpose of the light-dependent reaction is to capture energy from the sun and store that energy in the energy-carrying molecules of ATP and NADPH. And this portion of the process of photosynthesis occurs in the grana, which is inside the organelle known as the chloroplast, specifically in the thylakoid membrane, where chlorophyll, that light-attracting pigment, is stored. The light energy excites the electrons, they start moving around, and they move down the electron transport chain and combine with NADP plus and ADP, making NADPH and ATP. Then that ATP and NADPH plus a hydrogen ion leave the grana and go into the stroma, that's that fluid-like substance in the chloroplast, for the next stage. So let's review our image of photosynthesis and what we call our big tree. Remember, the tree is a plant, it's an autotroph. It has the ability to nourish itself. And so the tree has roots in the ground. The tree takes in water from the ground that's come from the atmosphere. It also takes in some minerals, and we'll talk about those minerals next semester when we work on our unit on ecology. But remember, when we look at the chemical reaction here, we're going to take the light energy from the sun that lands on the chloroplast on the leaves. The carbon dioxide gets taken into the plant or the tree in the underside of the leaves through the stomata. And we'll look more at the parts of the plant in our next lesson. The chemical reaction occurs, and the plant now starts to create sugar. It uses that sugar to self-nourish itself. Other organisms can come by and eat that plant for energy, and the plant produces as a waste product oxygen. And so if you recall the chemistry here has you using the 6 carbon dioxide molecules plus the 6 water molecules, adding in the solar energy to excite the electrons, and it produces the 6 carbon sugar C6H12O6 plus 6 oxygen molecules that go out as waste product. So remember, the reactants or the ingredients are the carbon dioxide and the water. The products or the results is the glucose and the oxygen. And remember that the solar energy from the sun is necessary to excite the electrons to send them down the electron transport chain, but it's not considered a reactant or a product itself. We have the 2 stages of photosynthesis. We've already talked about the light-dependent reaction that requires the solar energy and the electron transport chain. It's also known as the light reaction. And now we're going to move into what we're working on in this lesson, which is the second stage of photosynthesis, the light-independent reaction, where this all gets synthesized. And this does not require any solar energy whatsoever. It's sometimes also referred to as the dark reaction. The main name we're going to call it is the Calvin cycle. So the light-independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle, and sometimes referred to as the dark reaction because light is not needed for this part of the photosynthesis process. Now there's some key vocabulary. Make sure you add this to your vocabulary section or drop it down on the left-hand side of your notes. We've gone through this before, but I just wanted to review it with you. Reaction, sometimes we show it on our slides and in our notes as RXN, that stands for reaction. We have light-dependent reaction, light-independent reaction. We have glucose. We have a 5-carbon sugar, a 3-carbon sugar. We have a 6-carbon sugar. Those are all glucose. Oxygen, water, carbon dioxide gas, ATP, NADPH, the stroma, and the grana. So let's get into this light-independent reaction. The purpose of the light-independent reaction is to use the energy from the energy-carrying molecules, the hydrogen ions, the ATP, and the NADPH, to make the sugar. That's all the light-independent reaction does, is it uses all of those molecules to make the sugar or the glucose. It occurs in the fluid-like substance in the chloroplast known as the stroma. And that substance is between the grana, those stacks of thylakoid membranes, inside the chloroplast. So we're going to use those molecules to make the sugar, and it happens in the stroma. We call this the Calvin cycle, and the process is a series of enzyme-assisted chemical reactions that's powered by the ATP and the NADPH that produce a 3-carbon sugar from the carbon dioxide and the hydrogen ion from the water. The cycle actually happens twice, and then these 3-carbon sugars combine to make glucose, which is the 6-carbon sugar, C6H12O6. Let's take a couple of minutes and look at the photosynthesis Calvin cycle. This video is also posted separately in your Google Classroom tab with this lesson. You feel free to look at it as often as you like, but we're going to look at it together here. So take some notes along the way.
The leaves of this plant have cells that carry out photosynthesis. If we zoom in on this photosynthetic plant cell, we can see the chloroplast, where the reactions of photosynthesis occur. Photosynthesis consists of 2 primary steps, the light reactions and the Calvin cycle reactions. In this tutorial, we'll focus exclusively on the Calvin cycle reactions. The overall purpose of the Calvin cycle is to convert carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into carbohydrates, or sugars, which the plant needs to power its cellular activities and build new plant structures. The Calvin cycle reactions occur within the stroma of the chloroplast. The reactions use the ATP and NADPH produced by the light reactions to convert the CO2 to carbohydrate. Let's zoom into the Calvin cycle to take a closer look. The Calvin cycle could be divided into 3 phases: carbon dioxide fixation, carbon dioxide reduction, and regeneration of RUBP. The first phase, carbon dioxide fixation, basically captures the CO2 from the atmosphere so it can be used in the reactions. To do this, CO2 is attached to RUBP, a 5-carbon molecule. The enzyme used in this reaction is called ribisco, and the result of the reaction is an unstable 6-carbon molecule that quickly splits into 2 3-carbon molecules called 3-phosphoglycerate, or 3PG. Next, the process of converting the CO2 to carbohydrate begins. This phase is called the carbon dioxide reduction phase because we're adding electrons and energy to the CO2 molecule. During this phase, the sequence of reactions uses NADPH and some of the ATP from the light reactions. These molecules supply the needed electrons and energy for CO2 reduction. The electrons are added from NADPH, and through a series of reactions, 3PG is reduced to form G3P, a carbohydrate. ADP and NADP+ return to the thylakoids to be converted back to ATP and NADPH by the light reactions. One of the G3P molecules is set aside to be used as a building block for glucose, but the majority of the G3P molecules move forward into the 3rd phase of the Calvin cycle. In this phase, ATP is used to combine the rest of the G3P molecules to form RUBP molecules. This RUBP can then combine with additional carbon dioxide molecules, continuing the carbon reactions. To form a glucose molecule, the cycle actually has to turn 6 times because each turn of the cycle adds only 1 carbon atom from the incoming carbon dioxide. It's important to remember that the Calvin cycle is dependent on the light reactions to provide NADPH and ATP, which in turn provide the electrons and energy needed to form carbohydrates.
Okay, let's take a quick review of the light independent reaction. The light independent reaction is the 2nd stage of photosynthesis. The light independent reaction is also called the Calvin cycle, sometimes referred to as the dark reaction. It takes place in the stroma in the chloroplast, and it uses the ATP and the NADPH from the light reaction to power the conversion of the carbon dioxide gas to sugar. And this cycle goes around 6 times, picking up 1 carbon each time. And then the 3 carbon sugars combine to make the 6 carbon sugar. All right, you can go back and refine your notes. When you're done, open up the next tab and look at the light independent reaction recap. Includes also some questions from the light dependent reactions. And then when you're done, move on to the next lesson where we're going to examine the parts of the plant that are responsible for photosynthesis. Well, I'm Mr. Silverstein. The light independent reaction is a series of chemical reactions. You've now looked at the 1st stage of photosynthesis, which was the light dependent reaction, and the 2nd stage, which is the light independent reaction, also known as the Calvin cycle. These notes are posted on your Google Classroom. Make sure you complete the recap questions. If you have any questions along the way, just make sure you email me and I'll get back to you quickly. You guys have a great day.